The way of the world, reasons, devotion, be ever wonderful, fantasy, September. Let's groove tonight. Sing a song on your face and shining star. Now, book lovers, these are but a few of the songs written, composed, and performed by one of my favorite music groups of all time, better known as Earth, Wind, and Fire, or in some music circles, the Elements. Now, initially, I did read 2 books on both. Well, one of them was on founding member Maurice White, but then I also read a book on another founding member, Philip Bailey. I was going to do 2 separate videos, but I decided instead to just talk about them both in this one video. So come on in, book lovers. Let's get started. Hello, book lovers. Blind Black Devil here. Visitors, should you happen upon the channel, feel free to join us. We would love to have you here. And to my subscribers, welcome or welcome back. So I've read 2 books on this group. One of them was on the founding member of the group, and his name was Maurice White. His book is entitled Maurice White, My Life with Earth, Wind, and Fire. Not only was he the founding member, but he was also the lead singer. He was one of the songwriters, and he also played several different instruments. The other book I read is called Shining Star, Braving the Elements of Earth, Wind, and Fire. And this book was written by Philip Bailey. This is Philip Bailey's autobiography. He is also a founding member of the group. He is the one, if you know anything about their music, he is the one with the high falsetto voice. He's one of the lead singers, I think. Well, to me, my favorite lead song that he sang is Reasons. But yes, they were the founding members. So since I am talking about Philip Bailey, let's go ahead and start with his book. I am going to try my best to condense the 2 of these books into one, hopefully giving you a fuller picture of the group Earth, Wind, and Fire. However, if I get tired, I'll just turn this into a 2-part video. But on to the telling of Philip Bailey's story. The name of the book, once again, is Shining Star, Braving the Elements of Earth, Wind, and Fire. This is Philip Bailey's autobiography. Philip James Bailey was born May 8th, 1951 in Denver, Colorado, to parents Edward or Eddie Alberta Bailey and mother Elizabeth Crosland. Now, Elizabeth Crosland was born and raised up until around age 18 in Muskegon, Oklahoma. Now, she had very bad upper respiratory issues, mainly asthma. And so at some point in her young adulthood, it was determined that she needed to relocate for healthier or cleaner air. So this is how she ended up in Denver, Colorado. Once there, she met and fell in love with Philip, and he has an older sister by 1 year with his mother. Now, the problem was both Elizabeth and Eddie were ostracized, and ultimately so were Philip and his older sister, Beverly. She was older than him by a year. I don't know if I said that or not. But they were ostracized because their parents, Eddie and Elizabeth, the children were born out of, not only were they born out of wedlock, but they were products of an adulterous affair. You see, Eddie had a wife and 3 daughters. Now, his wife was the one who suggested that Elizabeth move in with he and their family. I guess she was new to town. She was working, but it was still hard. And so, out of the kindness of her heart, I guess, she got her husband to agree to allow Elizabeth to move in. I guess she, just thought nothing of it. Well, Elizabeth ended up getting pregnant not only once, but twice by by this lady's husband, because I don't recall them ever calling her, the wife, by name. Now, Eddie and his wife had 3 daughters, and the youngest of their 3 daughters was just a year older than Philip's sister, Beverly. Philip was the only son, but he was the 5th child and the only son by both parents, but he had 4 other siblings, 4 other sisters. Now, at some point, let's go back to Philip for a minute. Growing up, in the first 9 or 10 years of his life, he was very sickly. He says that he was a miracle baby, and Lord knows I believe in miracles. He developed I guess it would be considered an acute case of spinal meningitis. He lived through that, but for several years afterwards, he would come down with a pretty bad case of the flu every winter. He would be so sick that he would just profusely vomit. Or no, I'm getting ahead of myself. He would lose so much weight that when he was well again, they always ended up having to buy him more clothes, and especially shoes. Now, because they didn't have a car, I don't know if his mother didn't drive or they just, whatever. She would have to get him to the hospital by mostly public transportation. And he talked about once he was in there and he saw the police bring a lady in shackles. He saw that, and he said it just upset him so bad he just started profusely vomiting. And for years afterwards, every time he saw something or if anything made him this upset or anxious or probably frightened, he'd just throw it really bad. Well, at some point, somewhere around age 10, maybe 10 and a half, he no longer was getting the flu once a winter. And I also forgot to mention that he did inherit his mother's asthma. I don't know if his was quite as bad as hers, because she would have to be hospitalized from time to time for her asthma. But because he had such problems with the spinal meningitis and then the flu, the asthma could have been just as bad, but it just seemed like the flu and the spinal meningitis just kind of was what they were more or less trying to contain and keep. But he did eventually outgrow the flu, which was good. Now, as for his parents' relationship, at some point his father moved out of his home with his wife and family and wife and children, and moved in with Elizabeth, Philip, and Beverly. Oh, but for whatever reason, he said himself, he believes had his mother been living nowadays, she probably would have been described as being bipolar because she would just do outlandish things. Although they had a lot of fun times, they seemed to have just as many doubtful times, and a lot of it sounds to me, this is my paraphrasing or surmising here, that it was almost just as much uncertainty as it was the times he talked about, like, she would, like, if they were doing something and maybe they shouldn't have been doing it, she would scold them, maybe like just fuss at them verbally. And sometimes verbal abuse is worse than any physical abuse. But hers had an extra twist. She said one time he and his sister had been arguing or whatever. And she told them to pack their bags because welfare would be to pick them up. And she just left it. She never bothered hours later, days later, whatever later, to explain to them, she just did that maybe to scare them, to get them to behave or whatever. He said they huddled and cried many a nights waiting on that knock on that door. They just kind of had to realize at some point in time no one was coming to get them. Another thing that she did, like he said now, they themselves had a pretty good relationship, Philip and his mother did. However, she was really, really worse towards his sister, Beverly. And he said he could never really understand, and still didn't, but he and Beverly seemed to have a pretty good relationship, despite. But, like, Beverly got pregnant as a teenager in high school, and she put her out of the house, and she talked to her pretty recklessly, and all that goes with that. And what else did she do that was kind of on the violent side? Oh, yeah. The reason the dad left is because he was in the military. He told her he had to go. He went to serve a tour of duty somewhere. When he came back, he came to get her and the kids, she and Philip and Beverly. I don't know why I keep saying Philip and Beverly, but anyway, Beverly was the oldest. For some reason I have yet to understand, she told him, no, we're not moving. I don't know if they had talked about it before he left, and he just came back thinking they would carry on with the plan or whatever, but she changed her mind somewhere before he got back. And she just flat out refused to go. And then this is me paraphrasing here. She told him something to the effect that, no, you will not be moving us in some rinky-dink little flat with no running water and maybe no electricity. No, we're just not going to do it. So she locked him out of the house, and he was still trying to talk to her. She wasn't having it. She threw something at him, and she left. Now, when he moved in with them, they went from Beverly and Philip went from going by the last name Crossland to Bailey. But he said for years, he and his sister Beverly thought that their parents were married. But it was years later, I think after they grew up and moved out, they found out that their parents never, ever really were legally married. Well, the mother went on to have other relationships after that one broke up. But the men she dealt with didn't really seem to have much for the children. Now, they were never abusive to them. In fact, one guy, Philip said, I think he said they were together for like over 10 years or so. And the man just, he would come home, he might nod at Philip as like that was his way of speaking, but he didn't ever really seem to have anything to say, period, to him. But Philip, as a baby, he was told that as a baby, an infant or whatever, that despite all he had going on, he was a child prodigy, basically. He could find rhythm in anything, which most musicians can. He could hear it in washing machines or maybe footsteps or raindrops. He always knew that was never anything he ever had to work at. It was just what he did. So this particular boyfriend played some instrument. I believe either he played some horn, don't quote me because I don't remember. But although there wasn't much of a relationship between this man and Philip, Philip did acknowledge that this man was the one who instilled or planted the seed, rather, in him to let him know that, he really did have a gift, and if he continued to perfect it or cultivate it, it really could take him someplace, because this man never did do anything. I guess life just got in the way. He just had to work. We're talking about, 50s and 60s. And so he probably just couldn't afford. And not that Philip could do much better, because his mother never really made a lot of money. But she was able to buy them a house. It was a small house. I think he said she paid like $9,500 for that house, but it was theirs. So that was saying a lot, especially back then. It's saying a lot even now. But so this man, although he was musically inclined, he really just never was able to do anything with it. But Phillips did acknowledge that this man was the one that kind of sowed. The seeds probably had already been planted in Philip, but Philip realized or recognized he had a gift through that man. Well, eventually, he ended up getting his high school sweetheart, Janet, pregnant. She was a junior, he was a senior. Her father made him or told him that he needed to marry Janet. So he did, and they went on and had 2 children together. And you can just imagine, they were like, 17 and 18 years old when they married. So, for young love, and then you have a baby factored in the mix. So all that went with that. Well, along the way, at some point, his mother, I know he said she passed away in 1975. And that despite her issues, he still loved her. He actually felt and knew that she loved him. And he feels that she felt that way towards the sister. But for whatever reason, she just took the brunt of whatever man she was dealing with. But as far as his father, whenever he left them as children, Philip nobody really knew anything about him anymore. But once Earth, Wind, and Fire, they hadn't reached the pinnacle that they did, but they were up and coming. They had made a name for themselves. And I can't remember where he was, but he said out of nowhere, he just decided to go through the phone book to see if he could find any numbers for people with the last name Bailey. He did. And believe it or not, He called. It was Eddie Bailey. He answered. And he said they renewed their father-child relationship, and they talked for the last 3 years of his father's life. They had developed a relationship. He said his father had an extensive jazz collection where he had recorded off of like using cassette tapes and recording from the radio. I can remember doing that. Boy, that that took me way back. But yes, he said his father had that. Now, as far as Philip, he went to college for 2 years. He thought he wanted to become a classical musician. But I think what with having a young wife and the baby at the time, he felt or realized he just didn't have the time it would take in order to get a degree in that sense. Plus, he always loved music of all kinds. I believe it was jazz and classical were his first loves. So, since he could sing and he also played several instruments, he just pursued the music that we know of, contemporary R&B, jazz, rock, pop, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't formal classical music. But so after those 2 years of college, by this time, you know, he had already made a name for himself on the local scene. And his best friend from high school, Larry Dunn, who is also one of the members of the group. Somehow, I'm not exactly sure where he meets or learns of Maurice White, but he does. He introduces Philip to Maurice White, and they did that whole thing of going, you know, from city to city, moving here and there, and how he had to move the wife and baby, you know, to California and then back to Colorado because things weren't panning out the way, all of that. But in the middle of all of that, like I said, he went on to meet Maurice White. Well, book lovers, apparently I am getting tired, so I will stop here and pick up with part 2 later on this week, which will be on Maurice White, his book, My Life with Earth, Wind, and Fire. So, in the meantime, thank you, subscribers, for being subscribed. Visitors, should you happen to find the channel, feel free to join us. We really do have a good time when we do get together. And everybody, subscribers and visitors alike, please feel free to like, share, comment respectfully, and make sure your notification bells are on so you will be notified every time I upload a video. And in the meantime, book lovers, remember this: as long as there are books around, there is always something to read. Book lovers, be safe out there, and God bless.